Mac paced the front of the lecture hall with the sort of easy grace that came from years of commanding attention without demanding it. His voice was a rich timbre, wrapping around each word of mythological lore like a warm blanket on a cold night. "And so we see," he continued, gesturing to the projection screen where images of ancient gods and heroes loomed over the students, "that these myths are not just fantastical tales, but also serve as cultural signposts. They warn us, guide us, and often reflect the very heart of human nature." A sea of heads bobbed in agreement, their eyes alight with the fire of engaged minds. The room thrummed with the energetic exchange of ideas, questions flying from every corner. "Isn't it fascinating how the same themes recur across different cultures?" A bright-eyed student from the third row chimed in. "Indeed," Mac responded, his face breaking into a smile as he recognized the seeds of curiosity sprouting before him. "It's the universality of these stories that binds us together across time and space." Another student raised her hand. "Dr. Elliot, I guess I don't understand. Many of these stories are basically parables. How do they become the basis of society and religions?" Mac smiled. "I would love to answer that question. It is one that I have asked myself. I am neither an anthropologist nor a historical culture expert. Suffice to say, I think there could be many reasons for this outcome, too many to cover in the short moments we have left." He paused as the students seemed to hold their breath. "But let's say this. Remember that the function of religion is usually to control the masses despite the sincerity of the worshippers. I am not claiming some sort of indictment of religion. It's simply some food for thought." Mac looked up at the clock. "Well, I've brought it right up until the last moment. Reports are due Monday. I will see you all next time." As the lecture concluded, the room erupted in a chorus of applause and chatter. Mac stepped down from the podium, gathering up his notes. That's when he noticed Amber, perched at the edge of her seat, her gaze fixed on him with an intensity that bordered on reverence. Her pencil had stopped moving some time ago, forgotten as she watched him weave the fabric of ancient narratives through the loom of modern understanding. "Professor Elliot," Amber called out, her voice slicing through the din of departing students. She approached him with a confident stride, the lines of her tight business attire tracing her figure with questionable professionalism. Despite the propriety of her role as a graduate student, her clothes seemed to speak a language all their own, a dialect of desire that clashed with the scholarly setting. "Excellent lecture as always," she said, a tilt of her head sending a cascade of chestnut hair over one shoulder. "Some of us are heading out for drinks to discuss your points further. Would you care to join us?" Mac regarded her with a gentle, practiced politeness, the unspoken weight of his wedding band still heavy on his finger, despite its absence. "Thank you for the invitation, Amber, but I have plans this evening." He was careful to keep his tone light, friendly yet firm. Amber's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a crack in her carefully constructed facade. Her fingers nervously toyed with the hem of her blazer, betraying a hint of disappointment. "Of course, Professor. Maybe another time, then," she said, recovering quickly with a grace that suggested this was not her first rebuff. "Perhaps," Mac agreed noncommittally, offering a nod and a small smile. "But don't feel bad. Actually, I am a little surprised that you don't know about—" At that exact moment, the classroom door swung open with a confident push, and in strode Sarah Roberts with her signature blend of elegance and casual flair. Her eyes found Mac immediately, the corners crinkling with a knowing smile as she navigated through the remaining students who lingered on his every word. "Mac, you haven't forgotten our plans, have you?" she called out, her voice tinged with playful reproach. Amber's posture stiffened at the sight of Sarah, the air between them thickening with unspoken tension. A faint crease marred her brow as she observed the easy exchange from the corner of her eye, her fingers now still against the fabric of her blazer. "Of course not," Mac replied, drawn to Sarah's vibrant aura that seemed so at odds with the scholarly backdrop of the classroom. Mac looked Sarah up and down, albeit as politely as he could. She really was striking with her high cheekbones and dark eyes. She wore an all-white jumpsuit that perfectly traced her figure. Her hair was pulled back in a stylish bun, and she had sunglasses perched atop her head. Over the jumpsuit, she wore a cream-colored jacket that fell down to her matching boots. She looked amazing. "Amber!" Sarah said, rushing over to her and giving her a hug that seemed quite forced. "I thought you were working on your dissertation." If Mac had been a wiser man, he might have heard the sneer in Amber's response. "Yes. Well, I can't spend every waking moment in the library," Amber replied with a strained smile. She glanced pointedly at Sarah's outfit, her disapproval barely concealed beneath a veneer of civility. Some of us have a more hands-on approach to our research. Sarah arched an eyebrow, unruffled by Amber's thinly veiled jibe. Different strokes for different folks, right, Mac? She said, shooting him a playful wink. Mac chuckled, sensing the tension crackling between the two women like static electricity. Indeed, Sarah. Everyone has their own methods. Sarah turned back to Amber, her smile unwavering. Well, if you ever feel like joining us for drinks and discussion, you're more than welcome, she offered graciously. Amber's forced smile slipped for a moment before she composed herself. Thank you, Sarah. I suspect that this is a business meeting, and you're going to talk about the professor's book? Mac raised an eyebrow. He had thought about bringing up the book. How did Amber know about that? He tried not to chuckle. Amber flashed Mac a sultry grin and said, Well, after you're done talking business, I would love to get you on the dance floor, Dr. Elliot. Come join us at Getty-Ups. Without another word, Amber left. Shall we? Sarah extended her hand toward the door, and with a nod, Mac followed, the halls of academia giving way to the promise of the evening ahead. The amber glow of the setting sun cast a warm hue over the campus, as Mac and Sarah made their way to his car, the day's end bringing with it a tranquil calm. The scents and sounds of winter punctuated their small talk with rhythmic whispers as they neared their objective. Mac reached for his keys. Thanks for offering me a ride, Sarah said, her voice light and playful. Of course, Mac replied, unlocking the doors to his modest sedan. It's on my way. As they settled into the vehicle, Sarah's laughter filled the space, a sound that seemed to dance around the confines of the car. She shared anecdotes of her family, her father's relentless dad jokes, her mother's passion for community theater, which painted a picture of a warm, inviting household. Sounds like you grew up in a vibrant home, Mac mused, pulling out of the parking lot. Vibrant is one word for it, Sarah smiled, turning to face him for a moment. Controlled chaos might be another. And what about you? Mac asked, genuinely interested. What brought you back from L.A.? Sarah's eyes held a hint of mystery, her smile never wavering. Let's just say I was looking for something more grounded, something real. Their conversation ebbed and flowed as naturally as the drive, with Sarah expertly steering away from any personal inquiries Mac ventured too close to. He found himself intrigued by her ability to reveal just enough to keep him curious, while holding back the deeper truths she wasn't ready to share. Not that he thought it appropriate to get that personal so quickly. Upon arriving at the restaurant, Mac held the door open for Sarah, who stepped through with a gracious nod. The interior was cozy, with a buzz of conversations filling the air and soft light illuminating the room. They were barely seated when a pair of young women approached, their eyes bright with recognition. Sorry to interrupt, but could we please have your autograph, Ms. Roberts? One asked, her hand trembling slightly as she held out a napkin and pen. Of course, Sarah replied, signing with a practiced hand. With a polite thank you, she turned her attention back to Mac, a subtle flush on her cheeks from the encounter. Does that happen often? Mac wondered aloud as they browsed the menu, trying to imagine the life Sarah led beyond the boundaries of their small town. More than I'd like, she admitted. But it's part of the job, right? Right, he said, giving her an empathetic nod before they resumed their small talk, chatting about everything from favorite books to the merits of pineapple on pizza. So, I noticed that you haven't mentioned much about yourself, Sarah ventured, her gaze sharpening with curiosity. I've heard bits and pieces about your past and relationships. It's not my place to pry, but if you ever feel like sharing, I'd really like to know more about you. She gave him a sultry look. You know stuff that Amber told me. Mac was taken aback by how direct she was, but found her earnestness disarming. Just then, the waiter arrived, sparing him a moment to collect his thoughts as they placed their orders. Thank you, Mac said as the waiter retreated. He took a deep breath and began to speak, his voice low and tinged with nostalgia. Well, there's not much to tell, really. Mac swirled the wine in his glass, a rich Merlot that caught the dim light of the restaurant. Sarah leaned forward, her elbows on the table and her chin resting in her hands, her eyes reflecting a mix of patience and intrigue. I was born in London, he began, the corners of his mouth lifting slightly at the memory. The foggy days and the sound of Big Ben are etched into my earliest memories. Magical, Sarah murmured, sipping her water. I filmed a movie there last year and had an amazing time. Beautiful city. Magical is a good way to put it. London has always been special to me, Mac agreed. But alas, I was an odd duck, even back then. My dad's British through and through, and my mum's from the States. They made quite the pair. He chuckled, but there was a distant look in his eyes as he spoke of his parents. Then we moved to upstate New York when I was 10. It was different. The kids had a field day with my accent. He traced the stem of his glass with his fingers, recalling the teasing and the feeling of not quite fitting in. "Ah, you lost your accent? British accents are the sexiest, you know," Sarah asked, a playful tilt to her voice. "I know people from Ireland, New Zealand, and South Africa that would strongly disagree with you. As for my accent, I've lost it mostly. But it sneaks back when I'm tired or emotional, and certainly when I go and see my parents, who moved back to Nottingham 5 or 6 years ago," he replied, allowing a hint of his past to color his words. "I was a goofy kid, lanky and awkward, a loner by nature." "I am not sure I believe you," she said, gesturing to his current composed demeanor. "Tall, handsome, well-spoken, and a gentleman. That's very hard to picture." He tried not to blush at her compliment. He was always weak to women's compliments. But high school was kind to me in the end. I grew almost a foot my senior year. My skin cleared up, my weight and fight training manifested in the form of muscle, and by that time, I developed a passion for literature, and for some reason that made me articulate. He leaned back, the reminiscence bringing a faraway smile. "Then came university," Mac continued, shifting in his seat. "The same one where I now teach. That's where I met Vivian and Lydia." "Vivian?" Sarah echoed, a slight crease forming between her brows, a mixture of recognition and curiosity painting her features. "Vivian Sutton." Mac cocked an eyebrow in response. "Okay, how on earth do you know Vi?" Sarah couldn't help but notice the use of the nickname. "Let's just say that a little birdie told me." Mac rolled his eyes but didn't press. He continued. "Vivian was like a whirlwind, full of life and ambition. She had this fiery red hair and spirit, and laugh lines that hinted at a depth of joy and sorrow." His voice softened, the image of Vivian clear in his mind's eye. "And you fell in love," Sarah prompted gently, her tone conveying empathy rather than intrusion. "Madly," Mac admitted, the word hanging in the air between them. "We married young, full of dreams and ideals. But life has a way of testing you. It didn't last. A couple of years into our marriage, she left for law school after 2 years and moved to New York. We couldn't bridge the distance." Sarah's hand reached across the table, her touch light on his. "I'm sorry, Mac. That must have been hard." "It was," he said, acknowledging the warmth of her fingers before she withdrew. "But we were young, chasing our own paths. I guess I don't understand. You don't sound bitter or even upset at the thought. How is that?" Mac took a moment, his gaze drifting to a far-off place as if searching for the right words. "I was devastated when Vivian left. But over time, I realized that sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes two people can't be together, no matter how much they care for each other." His eyes flickered back to Sarah's, filled with a mix of sadness and acceptance. "We were different people on different journeys. In the end, letting her go was an act of love too." Sarah listened intently, her eyes soft with understanding. "You have such a kind heart, Mac. It takes courage to let go like that." Mac offered her a grateful smile, appreciative of her empathy. "You have to understand that I loved Vivian, with a burning, overwhelming passion that was almost all-consuming. I loved the tug of her hair when she was frustrated with me or school, how she looked at a cheesecake with such pure pleasure that I thought she was simply going to absorb it through her skin. I loved the smell of her skin when it flushed from intimacy." He stopped. "Sorry, I can't believe I just said that." Mac's face went totally red. "The point that I was making is that my love for her was not simple, but it simply proves a point. As much as I loved her, I knew deep down that our paths were set to diverge," Mac explained, his voice carrying the weight of his memories. "So she leaves and breaks your heart. What happened next?" Mac took a deep breath. He hadn't meant to discuss all this on a first date. Did he consider this a date? "Well, after Vivian and I decided to part ways, I threw myself into my studies and work. I was determined to make a name for myself in the world of literature, to prove to myself that I could thrive on my own." Mac's gaze drifted to the window, watching the soft glow of streetlights illuminate the falling snow outside. "And that's when Lydia entered the picture." Sarah watched him, this man. "Lydia was different from Vivian in every way," he continued. a hint of nostalgia in his voice. She was gentle and kind, with a quiet strength that drew me in. We started as friends, bonding over our love for poetry and late-night conversations about life's mysteries. Sarah listened intently, her eyes never leaving Mac's face as he spoke. The restaurant seemed to fade into the background, leaving only the two of them in their bubble. We fell in love slowly, like the changing of seasons, Mac said softly, a small smile playing at his lips. Lydia became my rock, my confidant, my home. We got married a few years later, in a small ceremony surrounded by our closest friends and family. I thought you said that Vivian was the love of your life, Sarah pointed out gently, her brow furrowing in confusion. Mac nodded, his gaze meeting hers with a mixture of sadness and fondness. She was. And if we had not divorced, I would have loved her continually. Vivian was intense and passionate. She understood me in a very visceral way. But with Lydia, it was different. It was calm and steady, like the ocean tide. She understood me in a way no one else ever had. Sounds like you found your happily ever after, Sarah mused, a wistful smile tugging at her lips. For a while we did, Mac agreed quietly. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect it. He paused, feeling the weight of unspoken words hanging in the air between them. The memory of Lydia's illness crept into his mind, the pain still fresh despite the passage of time. He cleared his throat, steeling himself to continue the story. Lydia was diagnosed with cancer about 3 years ago, Mac revealed, his voice tight with emotion. It was like a thunderbolt out of a clear sky, shattering the life we had built together. She fought bravely, undergoing treatment after treatment with a courage that left me in awe. Sarah reached out, her hand finding his across the table in a gesture of silent support. Mac squeezed her hand gratefully before continuing. For 2.5 years we battled the illness together, he said, his words heavy with the weight of memories. There were moments of hope and despair, victories and setbacks. But through it all, Lydia remained my beacon of strength and love. It must have been so hard, Sarah whispered, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. To watch someone you love suffer like that. It was the hardest, and our lives were turned upside down. It was like a cruel joke, a sudden storm that threatened to tear us apart. But Lydia, she was a fighter in every sense of the word. She faced the treatments with grace and courage, never once losing her warmth and kindness. Mac's voice wavered slightly, the memories of hospital visits and sleepless nights etched into his very being. Sarah squeezed his hand again in silent support. He drew strength from her touch, grateful for her presence in that moment. We fought together, Lydia and I, he continued, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. We clung to each other through the darkest days, holding on to the love that had always been our anchor. And did she? Sarah's voice trailed off, the question hanging in the air between them. Mac closed his eyes briefly, steadying himself before meeting her gaze once more. Lydia passed away last year, but even in her passing, she taught me the true meaning of love and resilience, Mac continued, his voice soft yet resolute. She showed me that love transcends time and space, that it can weather any storm. And though she may no longer be by my side, her spirit lives on in every word I write, every breath I take. Sarah listened with a mixture of sorrow and admiration, her heart aching for the pain Mac had endured yet inspired by the strength he displayed in sharing his story. I'm so sorry for your loss, Mac, she said, her voice filled with genuine compassion. But I'm grateful that you shared this part of your life with me. It takes courage to open up about such profound experiences. Mac offered her a small, grateful smile. Thank you, Sarah. It's not easy to talk about, but I've come to realize that our stories shape who we are. And maybe sharing them with someone else helps lighten their burden, and even others. Sarah gave herself a bit of a shake. This man. He was a gem, like no one she had ever met. What did she say to this man, once divorced and now widowed? One that had the type of love that seemed to exist in fairy tales? One full of raw passion and feelings, and another with such devotion that he slowly watched his young wife die? She took a moment to gather her thoughts, feeling the weight of Mac's experiences settling around them like a heavy blanket. The depth of his love and loss was palpable, leaving her speechless, yet yearning to offer comfort in any way she could. Sarah, Mac began, his voice gentle as he watched the emotions flicker across her face. "I didn't mean to burden you with my past. It's just something I carry with me every day." Sarah reached out and placed her hand over his, the warmth of her touch grounding him in the present moment. "Mac, your story is a part of who you are, and sharing it with me is a gift, not a burden." His eyes met hers, gratitude shining through the lingering sorrow. "Thank you for understanding, Sarah. It means more than you know." As they sat, immersed in the remnants of Mac's past, neither noticed the fan tucked away in the adjacent booth, phone poised discreetly. The soft glow from the screen cast a voyeuristic light on the scene as the recording captured their every word. Mac's phone had been buzzing incessantly since dawn, the screen lighting up with notifications faster than autumn leaves falling in a gust. He'd silenced it hours ago, unable to bear another journalist's plea for the juicy details of his past. The living room was a sanctuary of sorts, with Maggie and Stokely curled up on the couch, Albie sprawled at their feet, providing a sense of normalcy amidst the chaos. "I don't understand why they can't just leave us alone," Stokely muttered, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing patterns on Albie's back. Maggie hugged her knees tighter to her chest, her eyes distant. "It's like being back there in the system, always watched, always judged." Mac could hear the tremor in her voice, the echo of old fears resurfacing. "Hey," he said softly, taking a seat beside them. "I'm here, okay? We'll get through this together." His reassurance felt like a frail shield against the world's curiosity. But as days melded into a blur of evasion and whispered strategy, the tension only grew. Mac noticed the way Maggie's eyes flickered to every passing car, the subtle stiffening of her shoulders at unexpected sounds. She was withdrawing, retreating into a shell that he knew all too well from their first encounters. His concern peaked when Maggie returned from school one afternoon, her face pale, her hands shaking. "One of the reporters cornered me outside," she whispered, collapsing into Mac's embrace. "He was trying to get me to say bad things about you. He started yelling and I didn't know what to do." He held her as she sobbed, her vulnerability a stark contrast to her usual resilience. It took her a while to calm down. She did eventually. Several hours later, the doorbell rang. Mac answered warily, finding Sarah Roberts on his doorstep, her expression somber. "Mac, I know I should have called before coming over," Sarah began, stepping inside, her gaze flitting to Maggie and Stokely. Mac tried not to laugh. Apparently, the fact that a celebrity was in their home was enough to make them forget their troubles for a moment. Sarah gave them a small wave. "But I had to see you." Mac gave her a soft smile. "It's not your fault, Sarah. You aren't the one who caused this." "It was one of my fans who recorded us and caused this shit show," she said, shaking her head. Mac shook his head and surprised her by pulling her in for a hug. "It isn't your fault, so stop. It's good to see you." Sarah froze as Mac touched her. She tried not to look pleased. Mac released her as Stokely and Maggie watched them. The girls eyed her warily. But Sarah's apology seemed genuine, her regret tangible in the air. Mac could see the conflict within her, the pressure of her own circle pushing her toward decisions she didn't seem comfortable with. "Come on," Mac said. "Sit, you're a guest." The four of them made their way to the living room. Mac made tea and the girls sat watching Sarah. Sarah took the tea and drank some. It was good. "You shouldn't be too inviting quite yet. I am not here just to apologize." Mac cocked an eyebrow. "I figured as much. What's up?" "You're a hot ticket. People want more of you. My company wants me to convince you to sell your story, do interviews, and some guest appearances," she admitted, her voice low. Mac snorted. "What did you tell them?" "I told them I would ask, Mac." Sarah paused, appeared to consider her words, and then continued. "I think you should do it." Mac cocked his head in a mirrored expression of his dog, who had the same confused look. "And why do you think I should do that?" Sarah leaned back, meeting Mac's gaze with a mix of hesitation and resolve. "Because your story is powerful, Mac. People need to hear it. The world needs to see the strength and love that has carried you through all these years." Mac's eyes softened as he listened, contemplating her words. He knew there was truth in what she said, a chance to shed light on the struggles and triumphs that had shaped his life. But the thought of exposing his deepest wounds to the prying eyes of strangers made him uneasy. Maggie and Stokely exchanged a glance, silently communicating their concern. Sarah noticed the tension in the room and reached out a hand, her voice gentle. "I know this is a lot to take in, Mac, but think about all the good that could come from sharing your story. You could inspire others, make them feel less alone. I would be lying if I didn't tell you. These are the types of stories that make people stupid amounts of money. You're already famous. You should also get paid for your trouble. There was a moment of silence as Mac weighed his options, his thoughts swirling like leaves caught in a whirlwind. He looked at Sarah, her eyes filled with a mix of hope, apprehension, and even a bit of greed, then turned to Maggie and Stokely, who were waiting with bated breath for his response. Albie padded into the room, sensing the tension, and settled by Mac's feet, offering a comforting presence. Taking a deep breath, Mac spoke with quiet determination in his voice. I appreciate your perspective, Sarah, and I understand the intention behind it. He paused, gathering his thoughts before continuing. But this is not just my story to tell. It includes people I love, and it seems wrong to try to profit off of those people. I told them I couldn't help them. I don't know you that well, but forcing you to talk about your past in that type of setting, I think would hurt you. Thank you, Mac said simply. I'm sorry they put you in such a position. Sarah waved away the concern. I am sorry they put you in that position. I know the game and I am okay with it. Well, you never wanted any of this. He gave her a gentle smile. The conversation picked up, transitioning into less serious topics. After a bit, Sarah stood. She grinned at the girls. Maggie, Stokely, it was great to meet you. She gave them both a card. If you need anything, please call me. She turned to glance at Mac. If that's okay with you. After knowing their story, I cannot keep myself from wanting to help if I can. Mac felt a surge of gratitude towards Sarah, despite the underlying tension of their initial conversation. Her genuine concern for his family's well-being softened his initial wariness, and he found himself nodding in acceptance. Thank you, Sarah. Your offer means a lot to us, Mac said sincerely. The girls exchanged hesitant glances before offering small smiles in return. As Sarah excused herself and made her way to the door, Mac walked her out, Albie padding along at his side. The crisp air outside felt refreshing after the heavy atmosphere inside, and Mac took a deep breath, grateful for the brief respite. Sarah turned to face him before stepping off the porch, her expression serious. I'll do what I can to push back on the requests for your story, but be prepared. The media can be relentless. Mac nodded, understanding the reality of their situation all too well. I appreciate your efforts, Sarah. Thank you for looking out for us. Sarah started to walk off, then turned, took a hesitant half-step, and almost ran at Mac. Sarah grabbed his face in her hands, her touch warm and soft. She didn't waste time. Sarah kissed him with enough heat and passion to surprise even herself. Mac was taken aback, his mind spinning with confusion and surprise. He could taste the faint remnants of the floral tea they had just shared on her lips, a mixture of comfort and sweetness that lingered against his own. Before he could react, Sarah pulled away, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. I'm sorry, she stammered. Her face was horrified, so much so that Mac was unsure what to make of it as he processed his own surprise. She took a step back, searching his eyes, and before he could say anything, she kissed him again. This kiss was even deeper than the first. She kissed for a long moment and then turned on her foot and ran off. Bufisto, that was all Mac could think. What the hell was that? Mac stood on the porch, his mind reeling from the unexpected turn of events. Sarah's sudden display of affection left him bewildered, his heart pounding in his chest. He could still feel the ghost of her lips on his, igniting a spark of something familiar within him. As he made his way back inside, the girls exchanged wide-eyed glances, their expressions amused. Mac could sense their unspoken questions hanging in the air, mirroring his own internal turmoil. Maggie broke the silence first, the grin on her face giving away her feelings. So, how are we feeling? He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I honestly have no idea, Maggie. Sarah seemed overwhelmed, maybe? His voice faltered slightly, unsure of how to explain the sudden kiss from their unexpected visitor. Stokely arched an eyebrow, a mischievous glint in her eyes. Well, she definitely made things interesting. Mac chuckled despite himself, the tension slowly dissipating. He would need to think about that later. It felt strange to kiss someone who was not Lydia. Mac turned back to the girls. Maggie looked a little steadier and was smiling. Stokely's arm was around her shoulders, leaning on her sister. Mac glowered. Stop looking at me like that. Maggie and Stokely burst into laughter, their carefree giggles filling the room. Mac couldn't help but join in. the absurdity of the situation dawning on him. Despite the lingering confusion and surprise, he felt a sense of lightness wash over him in the presence of his girls. "You owe me $20, Stocks," Maggie managed to say through her laughter, her eyes sparkling with amusement. Stokely shook her head in disbelief. Those weren't the terms, Maggie." She still didn't tell him. "Oh, come on," Maggie snorted. She practically jumped in. "I win. You bet on the wrong horse." Maggie clapped her hand over her mouth. They looked at Mac. "Bet on the wrong horse?" Mac asked. "What does that mean?" Neither of them answered. They glanced at each other, back at him, then at each other again. In unison, they started singing. "Sarah and Mac sitting in a tree, KISING. Oh, you two are so dead," Mac cried, going flush. The girls squealed, and he ran after them. The chime of the doorbell cut through the muffled silence of Mac's study, where he sat with Maggie and Stokely. The tension in the room was palpable, a silent storm that had been brewing since the incident at the school. He rose, crossing to the door to find his friend, Officer Jim Donovan, on the porch, his face etched with concern. "Jim, thanks for coming," Mac said as he ushered his friend inside. "Of course, Mac." "What's going on?" Jim asked, his gaze drifting towards the girls. "It's Maggie and Stokely. They're being hounded by reporters. It's getting out of hand," Mac explained, motioning towards the living room where they could talk more privately. "Have there been any direct threats?" Jim inquired as he took a seat, his posture shifting into professional mode. "Nothing actionable yet, but I'm worried it's just a matter of time," Mac admitted, running a hand through his hair. "I think we need to ramp up security around here. Maybe even involve the police more formally." "All right," Jim nodded thoughtfully. "Let's start with some surveillance cameras around the property, and I'll talk to the department about regular patrols in the area. And if things escalate, we can consider a restraining order against any particularly aggressive individuals." "Thanks, Jim. I just want to keep them safe," Mac said, relief flooding him at having a plan in place. "Understood. Let me make some calls and I'll get things moving," Jim assured him before leaving through the front door. Mac returned to the study, where Maggie sat curled up on the couch, her eyes wide and haunted. He knelt before her, taking her hands gently in his own. "Maggie, we're going to make sure you're safe," he said softly, his voice a soothing balm. "Jim's going to help us set up some security measures. You won't have to deal with those reporters anymore." Her blue eyes met his, searching for the certainty she desperately needed. "Really, Mac? You can do that?" "Absolutely," he affirmed, giving her hands a reassuring squeeze. "You're part of this family now, and I will do everything in my power to protect you and Stokely." A tremulous smile tugged at the corners of Maggie's mouth. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Hey, what are families for?" Max said with a gentle chuckle, trying to lift the weight from her shoulders. He opened his arms, and after a moment's hesitation, Maggie leaned into his embrace, letting the safety of his arms envelop her. Stokely joined them, wrapping her arms around both Mac and her sister. Together, they formed a small fortress against the world, a testament to the strength of the bonds they had forged in the midst of chaos. "Whatever happens, we'll face it together," Mac promised, feeling the fierce determination to shield these girls rise like a tide within him. "Together," Maggie echoed, her voice stronger now, bolstered by the love and commitment that surrounded her. As the evening light waned outside, casting long shadows across the room, Mac held Maggie and Stokely close, a silent vow passing between them. No matter the storms that raged outside, within these walls, they were a family, and they would weather it all as one.